Hello everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Michael Landaway. I'm co-founder of Avanan, the cloud security platform, and I'd like to thank you for joining us during this cybersecurity month and during Bright Talk's cybersecurity event. We want to talk about security in the cloud. Now, because that's such a large topic, it includes shadow SaaS, malware, ransomware, data leakage, compliance, encryption, reporting, and so on. Today, we're going to focus on one thing. We're going to focus on phishing in the age of SaaS, cybersecurity against a phishing threat. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that we will take questions in the sidebar that we'll answer at the end. But first, I would like to So I apologize, we had a break in audio. So I'll start from the beginning. I apologize for the time. So today we are going to discuss phishing in the age of SaaS, phishing in the cloud. And the reason we're going to talk about phishing is because phishing is the #1 cyber espionage threat. In a review of all the breaches last year, we found, in fact, Verizon found in their data breach investigations report that 90% of breaches were due to phishing. Now, phishing is a broad topic. In fact, because 95% of phishing attacks included some sort of malware, it does include, we need to include malware in the phishing topic. Something that's changed and something that's becoming even a greater threat is the fact that phishing attacks are less broad-based. They're becoming more targeted. So while during Cybersecurity Week at Bright Talk, we can talk about the large cloud security issue, but the most important issue is phishing in the age of SaaS. So I think everyone is familiar with phishing and why it's a threat. But what's changed is that in the age of phishing, we now have new targets, new methods that require new defenses to defend against them. So this is what we're going to talk about today. What are the new targets in the age of SaaS? What are the new methods that the attackers are using that we need to know about? And then what are the defenses we need to have in place to protect against them? The reason why phishing is so successful, and always has been, is that phishing depends on the user to make a decision. And while most malware attacks require some sort of unpatched exploit, some sort of vulnerability that might be closed in the future in the OS or in a piece of software or an Office, phishing attacks have no expiration date. Essentially, it comes down to employee training. In fact, one CEO called employee training is like a signature that gets updated once a year. The idea is that we teach our users to identify certain threats and the attackers respond. In fact, when tested with known phishing email, these are tests done across an enterprise with a piece of known phishing, 30% of users actually opened that email. In fact, 12% clicked those phishing emails. And this is in an environment that, one, aggressively trains its users, and two, uses tools in order to test their users. And I think something that's important for us to know is that only 3% reported the attempted phishing attack. essentially what we're saying is that we can't rely 100% on the user to defend against phishing. So I think we're all familiar with the traditional phishing attack, in which an attacker sends a URL or some sort of malicious attachment through our email server to our desktop. And once that malicious email is on our desktop, it might install a piece of software, take over that desktop, and use that desktop as an internal threat to attack internal servers and internal devices. So that many times that first attack, that first compromise, is only a beachhead into our internal network. What's changed is that in the new attack, there actually may not be a need to actually get into the network. The target is actually the cloud services. Why? Because from the cloud, the attacker can actually do quite a bit. One, if you're using OneDrive or some sort of file sharing, they can exfiltrate data. They can connect via API to third-party services or connect to third-party SaaS and use that as a beachhead rather than the desktop in order to spread the attack. Now, once they have that beachhead in the cloud, they can use that to eventually attack the desktop or from the cloud attack other desktops within the environment. But the new target is the cloud. This leads to new security challenges. In traditional email attacks, we had some sort of gateway in front of the mail server to block those malicious emails. And if it made it through that perimeter, we would have some sort of desktop software that would prevent that malicious file or malicious activity happening on the desktop. And you might have some sort of network device that would monitor for malicious activity between devices. And you would have software running on your servers and on other devices trying to prevent those secondary attacks. Now, what does that mean now that we have a new target? It means we have a new security challenge, and that is, how do we prevent that malicious email from getting into our cloud mail service? And then if that fails, how do we prevent all those other behaviors that might take place once they have the beachhead in the cloud? What's happened when we move our email to the cloud is that we've reduced those multiple layers of defense to maybe just one outside the cloud. Phishing has changed over time. And the reason we know that the cloud is the new target is that credentials are now the #1 target. It used to be they wanted access to your bank account, and they still do. It used to be they wanted access to particular files, and they still do. However, what they found is that the easiest way to get access to all of those things and more is to get access to your credentials. They've also found that it's actually easier to get your cloud credentials than it is others. People become suspicious when they are asked to log into a bank that they might not even have an account for, but they're less suspicious when someone asks for their cloud credentials that they enter most every day. So we're going to talk about phishing within SaaS-based email, Office 365 and G Suite. This is important because 1 in 5 enterprise employees are using one of these two SaaS-based email. It's actually, these are both quite pervasive. But something we need to think about and something we need to concern ourselves with is the fact that the phishing threat is more than just email. It's possible to send a malicious file. It's possible to send a malicious URL within an email or a Skype message or a Slack message or any of the other communication tools that we use. In fact, I'm going to stop for a moment just to ask a question. We'll take just 20 seconds and ask you, what are the SaaS collaboration tools that you use? So you should be able to vote. I'll take about 10 seconds. The reason why this is important is that most people think of Office 365 or Gmail as the target for phishing, and it's true. Most do target those two. However, it's very possible that you're using one of the other communication devices. For example, Office now is pushing Skype and eventually Teams as the primary communication mechanism within an organization. Google has totally revamped Hangouts for exactly that reason. Why? Because the number one way people communicate within an organization is through Slack now. And what that means is that that's a trusted communication path in which a malicious insider could send a malicious URL, or malicious file, or some other mechanism that might convince somebody to do a bad thing. Now, there are other tools like Salesforce Chatter that you might be using, and you might be using another one. But all that we're really concerned about is the fact that phishing is more than just email. So I'll give it just 10, 20 seconds, and we'll see the results. What's nice is that right now we're seeing that most people are using Office 365 or Gmail, and the reason it's so high is because it's probably the reason you're on the call, but we are seeing people using the other tools, Skype, Teams, or Hangouts. I'm actually surprised not to see that much Slack because it is the number one growing internal communication system. So let's go back to phishing. In fact, when we're talking about the phishing threat, I'm going to primarily look at email because that's the most pervasive threat. But I want you to keep in mind that what I'm talking about now will also apply to those other communication paths. The first thing to realize is that when an attacker is going after a particular target, they actually already know whether you're using Office 365 or Google, which why we're seeing so many more targeted attacks. These are attacks that go after particular users of particular email systems. In the old days, a malware writer would test their malware against a desktop and against different malware security tools just to see if it would actually run on the endpoint before they send it out. What's happening today is that the attackers are actually testing their attacks, their phishing threats, against the default security of most of the cloud-based tools. This is why we're seeing so many more SaaS-specific attacks that target a particular type of user. What this does is give those attackers almost 100% access to that inbox. So I'll give you a couple of examples of the very targeted attacks we're seeing. One is probably one that you've already got in your inbox now, and that is an Office 365 phishing attack in which you click on a link, you think that is going to take you someplace that a trusted confidant sent you. However, you see a login page. Now, because an Office 365 user might log into different accounts and so on throughout the day, they actually might see this screen more than once in a day, which is essentially a bad habit that the attackers are taking advantage of. What we're finding is that embedded URL is now customized based upon the targeted user, so that when the user clicks on it, they go to a fake page, but it's pre-populated with their name, pre-populated with their email address, so it looks familiar and that much more trusted. One of the reasons why these attacks are getting harder to solve is that the phishing sites, those malicious forms that people are filling out, are popping up in an automated way so that we are seeing over 1 million new phishing sites each month. And they're typically online for just a few hours. What this means is that when people send out an attack phishing link or even a malicious link to a file, they don't have to worry about their reputation engines knowing about them, because they may turn up that site literally minutes after sending that email. This is how they're getting by the standard reputation engines that most gateway or default security tools use. We're also seeing very, very specific attacks that target particular aspects of Microsoft security. So here's an example we discovered earlier this year, and that is a very unique way in which Office 365 manages puny code, which is a type of URL, so that when Microsoft's security engine went to analyze the FedEx link within this attack page, it went to a site that the attacker set up that was safe, benign, pretty boring in fact. However, once it got through Microsoft security, because of the unique way the link resolved, when the user clicked on it, it actually went to a completely different site. So there was actually no way for Microsoft to see that it was a malicious site, even using their advanced threat protection. These are the types of very specific attacks that we're seeing. Another example, and I'm just going to bring up one or two just to make clear that they are working very hard to identify holes within the existing email defenses. Here's an attack that bypassed advanced threat protection because it actually bounced the referral through multiple sites, through Google's redirect to its own site, so it was automatically trusted, through a vulnerability within their Google App Engine that allowed the link to redirect to a malicious site. And it just so happens that the way ATP works, it only got so far in that URL chain and was blind to that malicious URL. Now, this was caught in other email engines. This was caught in Google, but this was specifically written to attack Office 365's ATP. Now, throughout all of this, there are thousands of different ways that an attacker might get your credentials by fooling your users. But something we may need to consider is that they may already have your credentials. Every few days we see a major attack that might download an entire database of usernames and passwords. And now Microsoft has not been compromised. However, if users are using the same username and password, they're being tested against the SaaS accounts. So it's very possible that even if there was no phishing threat to see, that accounts might be compromised. That's the true insider threat. So once the attacker has gotten credentials through one method or another, there are new methods of embed. It used to be that they would embed by compromising a desktop machine and then using that within your network in order to continue attacking silently. Now that they're attacking the SaaS, they actually embed themselves within the cloud service. Now, there are many ways to do this within different services, but the most common is to embed themselves within Office 365 or Google email services. And so one of the characteristics of that are inbox rules. What we see is that when an attacker compromises an account, they immediately start creating inbox rules to hide their behavior. So for example, they may just set a rule that accepts email as you and relays it to someone else, just as a way to exfiltrate data. Every single email goes out and it gets deleted from the sent box. There are other things they may do. They may forward just attachments. They may actually send a text message to themselves if they are found out by looking for particular types of emails. But most popular is that they start acting from your trash. The idea is that they start communicating with other users within the enterprise, and instead of having all of those emails show up in the user's inbox or sent items, they create a rule so that all of those emails that go out and all those replies that may come in get moved to the trash. So they pretty much camp out within the trash to send and receive emails invisible to the user, and then they just clean up after themselves. Another embed method is API authorization. And this is actually a much more dangerous threat because one example is the fact that it's invisible to most administrators and invisible to the user. So an example that we actually saw earlier this year was the Google Docs attack. And because of a bug in the code, it went viral. It went loud, it went big, and got caught in all the headlines. Now, we know about that because of a bug within the code. However, this type of attack is actually quite common. And the goal is to ask a user to authorize some sort of API connection to the SaaS. So while we know about this one, the ones that we see but don't make the headlines all have this in common. Most typically, they come from a known contact, which means it's probably the second step after someone's embedded within a cloud. Because they're asking for an API authorization, which is essentially just installing another app out of the Google App Store or out of the Office App Store. It's a legitimate link, so it'll never be caught by any phishing engine, by any other tool, because it's going to a legitimate site. If the user clicks on it and enters their credentials, they're actually entering their credentials within Google or within Office, and it's a one-time permission. And once that permission is granted, it is invisible but grants full access to the attacker. So with that API authorization, with this embed method, they've connected your cloud to a malicious service or a script or even a bot. And because it's a one-time authentication, changing the password does not prevent access. Even if the user regrets it the next day, changing a password won't break that API connection. To break it, it's actually a little bit complicated. It can be done, but it's not something that is obvious to the user, which is why they usually go for so long. And a lot of those connections aren't logged. So in the same way that you don't see the log request whenever you connect, for example, your LinkedIn account to your contacts, because that's being done silently, this acts in the same way. So these are the new embed methods that phishing attacks are now taking on, now that they're targeting the cloud, which means that we have a new security challenge. And it's much bigger than just keeping URLs out of the inbox. Because when they're going after those credentials, they might connect to unapproved SaaS. Not only to themselves connect, but more importantly, connect your cloud to unapproved SaaS. There are internal connections that you might approve. So you might approve connecting your Office 365 to your Slack account. That's perfectly okay. But there may be approved applications that you use within your enterprise, but you may not want to authorize. You may not want those connections to happen. How do you monitor that from the insider threat? The cloud has made it easier to collaborate with partners and customers, which means that they have their own cloud. They have their own Slack account, an Office account, and so on. And today it's actually very easy to grant access, to approve a collaboration so you have a shared Slack channel. Fantastic. However, how do you monitor those? How do you approve those? So the insider threat is really just a matter of monitoring your cloud environment and all of those communication paths in your cloud environment in the same way that you would monitor the insider threat within your own network. The new phishing threat has a different attack chain. Of course, phishing involves an email link or some sort of attachment that goes to an individual, and the idea of the phishing attack is that it alters their natural behavior or alters their safe behavior. to lead them to a malicious site or to click on that malicious attachment. Most attacks are going after the user credentials, which allows them now access to the primary attack, and that is to go after OneDrive files or those API connections, etc. So when we look at those attacks, we have to ask the question, how do we defend against them? Which is what I'm going to ask the next question is, what cloud security solution do you use or plan to use for your cloud? Now, that could be the default Office 365 or Gmail security. But you may decide to add advanced threat protection to Microsoft's default security. For email, you actually might have some sort of MTA gateway, like a Mimecast or a Proofpoint. And because we're talking about cloud security, you may consider using a CASB to protect against the next phishing threat. So the question is, what cloud security solution do you plan to use to protect against phishing in the cloud? So I'm going to keep this open for another 20 seconds. But because we are asking the questions about one type of threat, phishing in the cloud, we need to ask which of these tools can protect us against phishing in the cloud, but then also ask the question, what can protect us against the other threats? So I'm going to go ahead and stop voting, and it looks like the default Office 365 or Gmail security is kind of the key response. No one's using Microsoft's advanced threat protection or using other forms of security. And one reason why is that the default Office 365 security is actually quite good. Gmail as well. For those people that are unfamiliar with advanced threat protection, I'll describe that in a moment. But one concern when it comes to the MTA gateway is the fact that it only monitors inbound email, only the mail that's arriving into the SaaS, but doesn't address all those other threats. Now, for those people that are looking at a CASB, I cross that out for one reason alone, and that is if you look through the documentation of any cloud access security broker, they don't mention phishing as a threat they handle. They handle a lot of things, but phishing is not their core competency. So let's look at the built-in security. So something we do as an organization is that we're constantly monitoring the security capabilities of the major SaaS vendors. And to compare the security between, for example, Google Gmail and Microsoft, something that may surprise you, because this actually wasn't true a year ago. Microsoft is now consistently better than Gmail when it comes to stopping zero-day threats. This graph you see here is basically monitoring on a daily basis the zero-day malware that passes the default email protection. And the less that gets through, the better. So there are days in which there are attacks that are going specifically after Gmail, attacks that target Gmail and get through Gmail that Microsoft never sees. There are attacks that go after Microsoft, and they don't correlate because of that trend towards targeted threats. Now, if we see here that Microsoft is better than Google, something you do need to be aware of is the fact that it's not 100%, and that is expected. No company can offer 100% security, so not surprising. Fortunately, Office 365 offers additional advanced threat protection. Now, of course, it's an additional cost. So if you've got the high-end enterprise E5, it's built in. But if you've got one of the other Office 365 enterprise accounts, for an additional $24 per user per year, you can have their advanced threat protection for email. Now, something to be aware of is that it only applies to email. It doesn't apply to their other communication paths like Skype or Teams, and doesn't apply to OneDrive or some of the other suite solutions. But for that additional $24 per user per year, what kind of security do you get? Well, what we found is that it is better, but only slightly better. So that, yes, it does reduce the amount of zero-day malware that bypasses. It's actually not much more than the default security. Now, a lot of this has to do with the fact that their advanced threat protection actually informs their default security. So really what you're paying for is getting that information hours ahead of everyone else. Is that worth it? Entirely up to you. We always believe in having multiple layers of security. So looking at the attack chain, we can see that the traditional email gateway can block the top of the chain. It will analyze every email link. It'll analyze every email attachment and determine whether it's good or bad. If it passes that and gets to the individual's inbox, then your traditional MPA gateway actually doesn't offer more security beyond that. Now, one benefit of Microsoft's Advanced Threat Protection is that it does offer a little bit more security farther down the attack chain. Because with that, not only does Microsoft monitor those email links before it gets into the inbox, it also checks those links when the user connects on it, which is fantastic. So it moves the defense down the threat chain, the attack chain. So the question is, how do you solve this challenge? How do you solve the challenge of an insider threat or attacker with credentials abusing all of these data paths that we have in the cloud? That is a very good question, and that is a very difficult challenge. This is where I'd like to introduce our company, Avanan, the cloud security platform. And our motto is any cloud, any security, one click. But today I'm just going to focus on one thing: the anti-phishing capabilities within the Avanan platform. And this is going to address phishing, spear phishing, malware, ransomware, and account takeover. Essentially what we're looking at is trying to solve that big problem of all of your SaaS that may attack that may start within one. So to introduce you to the platform, Avanan is a cloud-based security solution that connects via API to Office 365, to Gmail, to Amazon, to most of the SaaS you're probably already using. Now, this gives us a tremendous amount of insight. That API connection, first of all, gives us visibility into all of your users, as well as data within OneDrive or data within the inbox. Also visibility into policy, so that if you have set rules within your environment, we can identify those rules and make sure those rules are enforced. We can identify access rights, so that if somebody decides to share something that they shouldn't, open up a folder or connect to a SaaS that you wouldn't want them to, we can monitor that as well. Most importantly, we see events, not only real-time events, but also historical events. And this gives us the ability to go further down the attack chain and provide defense beyond just the inbox. There are also other tools for Shadow IT, Shadow SaaS, and Shadow Share that might incorporate information from the perimeter, but the most important thing to know is that everything Avanan does is based entirely in the cloud. So when analyzing any cloud security solution, Gartner recommends looking at these 4 categories: visibility, compliance, data security, and threat protection. And I want to do that to kind of explain how we go through that attack chain and defend data beyond just the email. So first, when it comes to visibility, we have a tremendous amount of information. And for example, not only that real-time information, but a good example, we can look back in time and find phishing attacks, find malware in an existing inbox or outbox, we can look at events to look for that embed behavior, not only today, but might have been applied months ago. So that global visibility gives us that first step to providing cloud security. The most important thing to know about Avanan is the fact that it is a true cloud security platform. When it comes to populating those other categories, we truly believe that no one company can be the best at all things, which is why we have sought out the best when it comes to each one of the categories of security. So these are all brand names you may recognize. These are all brand names that offer their core technology to the Avanan platform. Because Avanan has taken that step to take their core technology and cloudify it, there is zero management. It's a true platform in that you set a policy once and never touch the individual tools within the App Store. Everything is tightly integrated, so you can actually have multiple security tools running under the hood, never need to manage them, but have them tightly integrated to eliminate those gaps that might come from trying to build a solution yourselves. We also offer bundled solutions so that we can identify those security tools that offer the best protection so you don't need to make those decisions. So what does this mean? It means that in the Avanan platform, we can connect to any SaaS service, Office 365 email, Gmail, but also other communication pathways within Microsoft, within Gmail, also within other communication tools to provide that anti-phishing and spear phishing defense, account takeover defense, antivirus, malware, predictive malware detection, and so on. The idea is that by picking those best tools, we can turn on that core technology with zero need to configure, zero need to manage, provide that full stack security that you would probably have in your own data center. So if you were trying to solve the old threat of email getting to a desktop and prevent malware or an attacker from spreading through your network, you had a full stack, defense in depth. You had malware protection on the endpoint. You had monitoring on your network. You had tools on your servers, tools on the other desktops, gateway devices to protect. This is the only way to offer that full stack, defense in depth, best of breed security for the cloud. And we can see this in action by looking at the results of a fairly typical day. Again, we see no one company can be the best at all things. So this graph might be a little bit complicated, but essentially what we see is that those defense tools that defend against malware using sandboxing or threat emulation can catch maybe 80%, 79% of the malware that came into the inbox that day. But it didn't catch everything. In fact, predictive AI filled that gap so that 98% of malware was detected that day. But even that left a 2% gap. And so we see that by adding additional layers, for example, anti-phishing analysis or behavior analysis and anomaly detection, we can get those additional layers of security. Now, does that mean sandboxing is the best because it catches more? The answer might be perhaps it caught the easy and it's the other tools that caught fewer but the harder attacks. What we see is that malware may get through one layer for one reason or another. Maybe the malware was written to bypass a common sandboxing tool or written to bypass a common antivirus. But by having those multiple layers of protection, we can provide true security. So let's look at today's question. How do we protect SaaS email? We connect via API directly to Office 365. There is no rerouting of traffic. There's no proxy, no gateway. The traffic actually doesn't go through the Avanan platform. We actually connect between Microsoft security and the user's inbox. This is what we call the virtual inline protection. So an email may come through a couple of layers of security, but before it hits the inbox, we can analyze it using multiple tools in parallel, all out of band because it's done via API. Something that's important here is the fact that not only do we monitor that inbound traffic, which you'd expect from any security solution, but also the outbound and most importantly, internal email. So when two employees email one another, that conversation might be missed by a traditional email gateway. But because we're embedded within that Office 365 or Gmail conversation, we can actually monitor for that insider threat, for those compromised devices that might be sending out malware from a user's account. It also allows us to do continuous inbox monitoring. What does this mean? If an email comes in through a traditional mail gateway, it might check a URL, see that that URL is not malicious, benign, and pass it on. But once it's passed on, it's now out of reach. What the Avanan integration does is allow us to continually monitor that inbox so that if a few minutes later that URL is proven to be malicious, we can actually reach in and remove that from the inbox. We can also communicate with that end user so that if an email comes in, we can edit the email to maybe warn the user that while that URL is not malicious or that file is not malicious because we've tested it, we don't recognize that sender, or that sender seems to be asking for something that is suspicious. One of the new attacks, and probably the most pervasive attack, is the email that has no attachment, no URL, and is asking for you to do something that might compromise your network. Those attacks are the behavior attacks or the language attacks that we can analyze and edit to warn the user to be a little bit suspicious, because even though it looks like it's coming from the CEO, all factors indicate that it's not. And then just to step back and remind us of the fact that while we've been talking about email security, all of these capabilities are possible through the other collaboration tools, because that embedded user might get into the network by compromising a Gmail or an Office account, but the first thing they may do is open up a Slack channel to other employees. Why? Because employees trust that internal communication almost implicitly, because it normally only comes from a trusted user, normally comes from another employee. So that is the new vector, and that's why we address those as well. So that insider threat might come from a variety of places. Someone with a compromised account, or maybe someone stole a Post-it note with somebody's password. But once they're in, how do you stop the rest of the threat chain? It may be possible that someone found their credentials and there was no email. There was no malicious site. Account takeover protection is the analysis of that behavior that takes place after an account is compromised. And we went through some of those earlier, and there are thousands of different things that an attacker will do that's more than just anomaly detection. It's actually behavior that a normal user would not do or we have seen before. So what we found is that most attackers are very, very sophisticated getting into the network, but when it comes to actually doing something on the network, doing something malicious, they're pretty much hemmed in by the editing of rules or behavior that is monitored through events that we have access to. So it's actually harder once they're inside if we can monitor all their behavior. So the Avanan platform is a single pane of glass to look at all of your cloud when it comes to security. No matter what cloud you're using or what kind of security you're concerned about, be it phishing, be it malware, this is what we do. And again, because no one company can be the best at everything, we have found the best of breed solutions and the next-gen solutions to protect against tomorrow's attacks. There are new targets in this age of SaaS. There are new methods, and the Avanan platform is the new defense that brings the weight of the entire security industry from brand names you know and recognize to solve this problem. So we are Avanan. We offer any cloud, any security in one click. And I would like to open up to questions. We do have a couple from the audience. Before I do that, I would like to offer all the attendees a scan. What this means is that we can look at your existing account and identify all those things we talked about when it comes to the attack chain. We can go back in time and look at historical attachments for malware, look at URLs that might have been deemed okay at the time, but we see that are malicious. We can actually see if somebody clicked on those to identify a compromised account. In fact, we had one customer, in fact, we found a Trojan in an email of a consultant that no longer worked there, an account that was closed, to identify that threat. Because we connect via API, there is no redirection of traffic, so there's zero disruption, and it takes just 2 or 3 minutes to connect. So I'd like to offer that to everyone that's on the call, and then we can go on to questions. So a couple of questions. One is, when it comes to the licensing of those tools, do we need to have a license for all the tools on your platform? We are a platform. We offer those tools as an app store would. In fact, we take care of all the licensing, all the scaling, all the updating, all the maintenance. So essentially, once you choose to have that layer of security, you don't need to look at it again. That is what we mean by one click. Now, there's a question when it comes to on-premise. So yes, we have that full security stack, and people have asked whether we can take that security stack and put it within your network, but unfortunately, that's not what we do. We are a cloud security company, and we can provide that full stack of one-click security in the cloud, but in your network and in your data center, you'll still have to do it the old-fashioned way, and that is put together a rack of all those different tools, and our job is to do it in the cloud. So we've got one more question when it comes to the scan, and that is, do I need to do that this week? And no, because this is will be recorded, those people that watch it all the way to the end, they're rewarded by being able to get that scan by clicking on that link, the avanan.com BT-scan. So in fact, it's actually attached to the webinar, so you can click on it there. So again, my name is Michael Landaway. I'm co-founder of Avanan, and I'd love it if you reach out to us if you have any more questions. And this will be available and recorded shortly. Thank you again.